Are we on? Is
I
this
think
thing
so.
on?
I see the little live button up there. I like it.
Aha, the golden live button, as we call it. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I am Jake. Brian, say something so you show up in the video.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Did you hear me talking right there?
Yeah.
That's awkward. Is that you?
That's like a super long delay.
That's weird. But so long as you can hear me, I can hear me, we're good. So it's been a while since we've been on the air. In that time, I have had a bachelor party, a wedding, 17 fucking UFC events, and Brian, what's been new in your life?
Oh well, same old, same old. Nothing really, just work, being in your wedding, which was awesome.
Yeah, see,
so.
that's what loyalty does. You show up for the show, and you can be in my wedding. So, unfortunately, I can't extend that offer to future guests on the show because I'm only going to be married once. But I every time I want to do the Hanato Laranja, but I digest instead of digress. But wow, a lot of shit has happened. Remember when we last spoke, we were talking about doing a countdown show for Michael Bisping before he won the fucking UFC middleweight title, which I told anybody who would listen. Brian testified to this. When we were out there at the Kern River on a rafting trip, I told Brian, I'm like, watch. Michael Bisping's going to win because this is the first UFC pay-per-view I haven't watched live since before Frankie Edgar fought Gray Maynard. And you're like, oh, yeah. And it happened. And then you had Stephen Wonderboy Thompson beating Rory McDonald, which was depressing. I have had a picture on my phone saved for months since Rory McDonald talked about how he was going to go into free agency on the MMA Hour.
Right.
I've had an image saved on my phone of Dobby from Harry Potter. My whole plan was I was going to put Rory McDonald's face on his and be Rory is a free elf. But he lost, and it was so depressing, I couldn't do it.
It was awful. Yeah, I mean, it was, Rory McDonald's very much like a shell of his former self. You know what I mean? He's like someone so far away from the Robbie Lawler fight that, like, it's almost like they're completely different people.
Yeah, you remember when he was GSP Jr., right? That happened,
right.
And then now he's – and it's like – it could just be that Wonder Boy was that good, but it also seemed like he had a really hard time with that broken nose. So it's kind of like he got to piggyback off of Robbie Lawler's effect.
And the thing is, it's one of those things where people know he's going to have a vulnerable nose. And it's one of those things where he can, barely get like a jab, like a couple jabs to the nose, break his nose, this or that. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it was so badly damaged with the Lawler fight that, I mean, you got to imagine it's very different going on for him.
Yeah, I would wonder if what surgeries are actually available, because he mentioned that in the post-fight press conference, and just like, I don't know, putting like a titanium mesh over your bones. Does that work in real life? I know it happens in the comics. But yeah, it was weird. Then Michael Bisping won, so let's chat quickly about that. Brian, are you happy? I'm happy. Are you happy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, then with that, I think we're all the way up to International Fight Week. And there's so much to talk about on International Fight Week that we have forsaken the typical podcast, broadcast version of the show. We're just going to do a super show today. We're just going to talk about all the shit and spare us the indignity of trying to use time management skills. So first off, we had Ultimate Fight Night 90, which was Rafael dos Anjos versus the Underground King, Eddie Alvarez. Brian, off the top, let me ask you, can you be the Underground King and a UFC champion at the same time?
Nope, doesn't work, man. You got to get a new nickname.
Right? I mean, I'm not calling him a sellout, but, you're too successful.
Right. It's something that, it makes sense coming from a guy who's been in the league, well, not the league, but in the fight game for so long. You know what I mean? So it in a way, it does make sense. But, yeah, I mean, if you're king, but you're the Underground King, it's like, well, I mean, I don't know if that really works.
Yeah. It's kind of like if this bike was a pipe bomb was playing the Forum, you'd be I'm sorry, what? Your whole gimmick is the fact that you're like this underground aggro punk thing.
Right.
I might have just alienated a lot of our audience, but I might have endeared us to a few crust punks, Brian. So that's kind of my goal, because crust punks and MMA guys overlap so significantly. So one interesting factoid about the light heavyweight title is that no champion has ever been able to defend it more than 3 times, or 3 times. It's 2 times, then you're done. So
that's crazy. I remember you saying that, and it didn't quite dawn on me until I did the little bit of math in my head. I'm like, wait, that's weird.
It's truly shocking to think about those statistics. Like another statistic, up until that Friday, there hadn't been a Brazilian, right? Yeah, at least one Brazilian champion since 2006.
10 years.
It was almost exactly 10 years, and it lasted for 1 day. And then Amanda Nunes went and shit the bed on that one. Thanks very much.
And then Jose Aldo. Well, that's a tough one.
That doesn't count. About. He has a glorified #1 contendership. We'll get there. We'll get there. I'm a little upset about that one. Like, if you've probably seen the tweet. I said, I'm okay with Frankie losing, but the idea that he lost 4 rounds to 1 just didn't happen. That's just not what happened. And I will gladly fight you verbally for it. Maybe even physically if you shuffle your way into my living room where we were recording.
That's funny because, I feel like there was a couple instances where judging was very off. I mean, look at the Sage Northcutt fight. I feel like he clearly lost that fight.
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll get into the co-main event for the fight night. Well, let's finish the Eddie Alvarez talk. Eddie Alvarez, killer victory, right? I mean, flawless in my opinion.
Right.
And it's almost to the effect where, how everybody was talking shit about, or not shit, but people were talking about Holly Holm, like suspecting that she'd been holding back in her previous fights because she was so different and dominant in the Ronda Rousey fight. It almost felt like that with Eddie Alvarez. Am I wrong? He, lost his debut, then got 2 split decisions in a row, very tentative performances that he admitted he was kind of nervous about, and then he just became this fucking killer. Like when he fought Shinya Aoki for the third time in Bellator.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah, it's just awesome to see. You know what I mean? It's one of those feel good stories for Eddie Alvarez. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, and then you look at Eddie's performance against Patricky Pitbull Ferrer or whatever you pronounce it as. It's the fight where Eddie's wearing vibrant, obnoxiously green shorts. I know because I just showed my wife. But you look at the Pitbull brothers and you kind of look at this is like the B version of RDA. If I'm not mistaken, I mean, grappling is solid, striking is there, good performers, solid athletes. And then Eddie just fucking starched this guy and made him look just remedial. And this is a guy who we were just talking about was so good he had to be on steroids. That's the only excuse people had for how dominant he was against Anthony Pettis was, he had to be cheating. It's the only way.
Right.
And then Eddie goes out there and makes him look plain.
Yeah, man.
That fight was amazing. Eddie clearly deserved the performance tonight.
It's just, I mean, he's a scrapper, you know what I mean? He just goes in there and he stands in the pocket. And but what's interesting about Eddie Alvarez is he's a smart fighter, though. I mean, you look at when he fought Pettis, he's like, then again, I mean, RDA isn't exactly a slouch standing, but I mean, he took Pettis's strong game and he took it completely out of the fight, right, by taking him down and grinding him out. So I mean, yeah, I feel like he's a smart fighter.
Yes, and one of my favorite things to hear him say was when he was talking about, some kids played stickball, some kids played hockey. We got in the street and fought each other with gloves on as a kid. I worry about his brain health. He said that he sparred over 100 rounds in preparing for this fight.
Right.
If he can do it and he can hold it up, he could very well be a hugely marketable guy for the UFC, the new UFC, which we'll get into as well.
Who do you think has it next? Do you think it's Khabib?
I don't know, because Khabib's going to be out again until at least, if he is celebrating Ramadan, you take those into account. He's probably going to get injured 3 or 4 times between now and then. I don't know. I'm tempted to say if Ferguson wins, just give it to Tony Ferguson because he's going to be fighting this weekend or on Wednesday,
Right,
2
right.
days from now. The shelf life of this episode is non-existent. Thank you, UFC, for just making so much shit. You look at you ever look at a comedy podcast and you're like, I went back 4 years, but it's still topical, right?
Right.
Literally last week, there was the Joe Rogan experience with Brendan Schaub. That was recorded the day before John Jones got pulled from UFC 200. 20 minutes of their conversation was about John Jones, Daniel Cormier, and I just turned it off because it was already irrelevant. And that's what happens with this show. If we don't get our 5 viewers now, we're never getting the 5 viewers. So if you have any ideas how to increase the longevity of our program, please tell us because I'm out of ideas. I'm just at my wit's end. But Roy Nelson versus Derek Lewis was quite possibly one of the worst fucking fights I've ever seen in my life.
It was definitely a snore fest. Yeah, it was just one of those things that, typical Nelson fashion, I'm just going to plod forward and use my face as a blocking mechanism. God, man, that guy takes a shot. I mean,
and also, he's talked shit about people grappling before, right? He's talked shit about people doing that. And then he did that thing. And it's just so funny how, I think that the brain trauma of him getting beaten to death has made him lose his short-term memory because...
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that last shot that Derek Lewis had on him with that jaw.
Where he spit all over the place?
Literally looked like his jaw broke. I was like, holy shit, how is this guy still, jibber-jabbing?
And I'm really confused that, most fighters will do, after party at the Bellagio or something. I've never heard Roy Nelson do an after party thing, but if he's the guy to do the after party at Shakey's Pizza, am I right?
Right. Although at the same time, maybe he's that guy that really doesn't have that many MMA friends.
Or any friends.
You know what I mean? He's like, after party, mom and dad, you guys get some free food.
Oh, God. That assumes they haven't died of hypertension and diabetes at this point. Oh, that's dark. Oh, God. Let's move on. Alan Jobwan, the model, versus Belal Muhammad. The only reason this fight's relevant is because I want to talk about something. Muhammad got knocked down 3 times. And it almost makes you wonder at a certain point if you can get into the kickboxing model and say, you've TKO'd, my friend. You've been knocked down 3 times. Which, if you look at the compounding elements of brain trauma and everything, should the ref be able to intervene at that point, even if there's no action and he just gets knocked down for the 3rd time? We're not talking slips like Frankie versus Jose. We're talking knockdowns.
I feel like it's a good rule to go by. You know what I mean? It's one of those things that, in the long run, a lot of people will be thankful for.
Yeah, the short term, he's going to be like, well, you fucked me in this way, but at least he doesn't have sponsorships to worry about, right?
And then also you look at it and it won't completely change the fightscape, but it will change fighters' approach, right? They'll be a little more measured. They're not going to go in as reckless because they're like, well, shit, if I get knocked down 3 times, the fight's over. You know what I mean?
Yeah, technique will definitely have to increase at that point. And then also, I mean, we're getting to the point where the sport's developing at such a rate where the technique is so much farther than it was. You put even an average fighter, take Derek Lewis, take Roy Nelson, put either of them in UFC 1 through 7, and they win handily. And those guys are not the best. Neither of them are going to fight for a title anytime soon. And that's kind of my point, is that everything has evolved. The rules should kind of evolve.
Absolutely.
So now that's completely done. That's the only noteworthy thing in that fight because that fight was not very good either. What fight was good? Irish Joe Duffy versus Mitch Clark.
Yeah, don't blink. Holy shit.
It was quite astounding. I mean, I was really big on Joe Duffy before the Poirier fight. I didn't necessarily fall off the bandwagon on him. I did have him winning this fight, but it was just I thought that we were going to be a lot farther back. I thought that his progression was going to be something where we'd have to really pump the brakes. But after a performance like this, it's really hard not to be like, fluke.
Right, exactly.
Because he did break his nose relatively early in that fight, which is a huge factor. He's still a great fighter, and damn, I mean, he made that look easy. 26 seconds comes in the official time. It was 25 seconds and change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's enough to definitely turn some heads. You know what I mean? Get him up.
We're not talking about like a flash knockout or something like that. You have to get into position, then get the choke sunk in, and it was just spectacular.
Yeah.
The knockdown that led to it was just fantastic in its own right.
Everything about it was just really fluid. You know what I mean? Nothing about it was, like there wasn't much of a scramble, this or that. So, I mean, I guess it's a lot of like everything coming together perfectly. You know what I mean? Anything that's kind of that quick, it's either going to be a flash knockout or everything worked perfectly. And it seemed to be the case for him.
Yeah, I honestly wonder if Conor loses to Nate Diaz, I mean, he clearly has no interest in going to 145, if he would vacate and then just end up in a position where he's not that far off from Joe Duffy.
Right.
He could levy his 145 title, even after 2 losses to Nate Diaz, into being in the top 10 at lightweight. And then that puts Joe Duffy on his heels. So, there's still potential for that guy. I'm really high on. I mean, all the TriStar guys are great. I think TriStar guys are always easy to help you separate the quote unquote true MMA fans from the just bleed fans, because they always come in with a tactic. But I mean, how can you talk about a game plan when it's over in 26 seconds? There's no way to game plan for 26 seconds. That's just pure talent.
He's like, yes, my game plan worked perfectly. I knew that was going to happen. Like, I had it timed perfectly. I mean, if I would have taken a couple more steps, maybe I would have gone in like 24 seconds. But I mean, roughly 24 to 26 seconds was my game plan, and it worked. I don't feel like that ever happens.
Well, let me ask you this question. How many Mississippis is 25 seconds? Talking 7, 8 Mississippis?
Yeah, probably about that.
Jesus Christ. I mean, for those of you, American fans, the one true continent here, that's a joke. Okay. But my point being is the time that it takes in flag football before you can tackle, or well, you're not supposed to tackle, but I would anyway. You're talking a couple of seconds and a handful, and then you're done. So it's just the fact of that immediacy. And also imagine to be Mitch Clark, because he's so lucid at that point comparatively. It's not as though he's
right. It's not like his clock was rung. It's not like he was completely dazed, knocked out, or this or that. Like, he tapped out, but at the same time, after the fact, he's just like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah, I just wasted 8 weeks of my life to make half as much money as I could have, and it was over like that. And then we'll talk about it again. But I didn't think that the whole idea of people having to be choked out in order to maintain their manlyhood or whatever, I don't think that's the case. But I know that it has to haunt people when it comes to a situation like this.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's been brought up before where certain fighters who just they don't really prepare for like a submission game. And anytime they get any remotely kind of constriction, either on their neck or their arms tweaked a little bit, and it doesn't even have to be completely extended, or the choke doesn't have to be that sunk in, and they're just like, they like immediately tap out.
The panic tap, right? I mean, exactly. Look at Chael Sonnen versus Anderson Silva. I mean, he panic tapped to that triangle. So, I mean, there's a lot of times where people, I think, just out of instinct, go for it. And I honestly think that Conor McGregor, not to just continuously shit all over that.
Conor Diaz one?
Yeah, but I mean, I honestly feel like he didn't want to like just admit that he was knocked out and outstruck, because he was clearly rocked. So he goes for the worst takedown ever. A quadruple amputee who lies on a doorstep in his name. Right. Could have done it better than that.
Instead of saying, oh yeah, me supposedly like the greatest striker ever was getting outstriked, so I'm just going to lunge for this awful takedown, so that way a guy who has an amazing ground game could submit me, and then be like, oh well, he submitted me because he's better on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, the big concern of mine when it comes to Conor McGregor's rematch is, quite frankly, you're not knocking out Nate Diaz. I mean, if you do, that's great, but he's durable as all fuck. And so the idea being, you might have better power, great accuracy, but technique-wise, just varying different techniques.
Technique-wise, endurance, stamina, resilience. I mean, you're looking at like
a huge factor.
There's giant like differences here.
You have a dude taking shots of tequila on a yacht versus a guy who's training to fight. At the time, he was training to fight Rafael dos Anjos, who had just murderized Donald Cerrone. Who now fights at welterweight and beats middleweights. So I don't know what the fuck Conor McGregor was doing in that training camp, but it clearly wasn't enough.
Right. He's playing butt touch or whatever, touch butt.
And it also goes to show you that Nate Diaz's striking was a lot better than we all gave him credit for. I mean, we always kind of considered him a volume striker. We've talked about that on the show many a time.
I never thought Nate Diaz didn't have a amazing strike game. I mean, anytime, like the first time I saw him when he fought Cerrone, I was just apart.
Oh yeah, that fight's pretty spectacular. Also, the mind games that go into it show like just how it doesn't take a whole lot for Nate to get into people's heads too. Remember, that's the one where he smacked Donald Cerrone's cowboy hat off of his head and shoved him. And that, I mean, Cerrone's talked many a time about how that fight just fucked with his head. And imagine how Conor's head's going to be fucked with going into that's far and away. We got to get to the Ultimate Fighter 72 finale with Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Claudia Jadella. Did I pronounce those right, Brian?
Yeah, close enough.
I think so. So some people online were freaking the fuck out about this fight. Brian and I both scored at 3-4-5 for Joanna, 1-2 for Claudia, right?
Are you thinking people are saying that Claudia should have won that?
A lot of people online were saying that.
That's weird. I mean, I understand if this is a non-title fight. If this is 3 rounds, Joanna loses any day of the week. But when it goes into championship rounds, even before championship rounds, it's like Joanna clearly turns up her level. And I mean, it's not just Joanna consistently being like bouncy as far as her stand-up, but it's Claudia digressing and degressing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I mean, she's essentially, spent. You know what I mean? She blew her load in the first 2 rounds. So
regressing. You were right.
Sound weird. There we go. Yeah. So I mean, it. I don't know. I don't understand what people saw differently than what you and I saw. You know what I mean? And that's not just saying like, oh, me and your buddies and we do a podcast together, so we should have the same kind of, views on a fight. You know what I mean? Like I feel statistically and as far as just watching the fight, this is how this is how it went.
Yeah, and one thing that always drives me crazy, when you see this a lot in post-fight press conferences where it's like, I'm not going to make an excuse, but I'm going to make an excuse. And Claudia's like, I'm the more technical fighter, and if my endurance would have been there, then I'm the girl who wins. That's completely fucking irrelevant.
Right. Because that's just exactly like the same thing as saying like, oh, hypothetically, right?
Exactly.
That means nothing.
Like, oh yeah, my strategy going into this fight was better than their strategy. They just knocked me the fuck out. It's completely irrelevant because you weren't able to implement that plan.
Yeah. It's. I mean, like you texted me earlier about that. Right after she had said that, and my response to you was like, yeah. I mean, if I were Joanna, I would just be like, okay, and I mean. I would literally just have my hand moving up and down and be like, well, do you see the belt? It's around me, not you. So you can say all you want. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
Go ahead and edit the Wikipedia page to say that you're better because somebody's going to correct it because that's just wrong. You are not correct in that statement, female. And I feel bad. Like, I think Claudia's a great fighter. I think she'd do really well in a 125 division.
It made her look bad.
You've lost twice now. Your options are limited. Don't just sit there and say stupid shit that's going to be negligible. Like, oh, I'm the better fighter technically. That's kind of like saying, like, well, technically Empire Strikes Back. No, technically, it's just your opinion, right? I mean.
Right. Yeah, it is. It is. It's like, well, to each their own, I suppose.
And so I guess we move on to Will Brooks dominating. He didn't even dominate, but he did a great job against Ross Pearson. And I really wanted to talk about this fight because I've been huge on Will Brooks for literally years. And I also thought that it was really uncool for Ross Pearson to call him a zero. He was offended by Will Brooks' comments kind of talking about, Ross is a gatekeeper. There's no question about that, but I get it. When you are the gatekeeper, to be called the gatekeeper, I'm sure is traumatizing. But you're like, Oh, Tom fat. Like, it's like a fat chick. Like, you could be as fat as you want, and we could talk about empowering fat chicks. We can talk about that. But as soon as you're like, hey, fat chick, I need to reach something, it's off.
Right. You know, I feel like Will Brooks should have just been like, all right, Ross, put your earmuffs on. All right, I'm so sick of this gatekeeper. I'm going to handle him right now. Okay, earmuffs off. Okay, we on? All right.
Yeah, like, it just felt like the whole Zero thing was a very pointed comment, especially after, you know, Will Brooks had talked about, you know, almost committing suicide years ago, coming from a lower organization, being kind of disregarded from his last company. It felt like, you know, you ever have those calculated insults that are really subtle and simple?
Right.
If you have somebody who's very vain, calling them a poser is just crushing, soul crushing, right? But it's really something simple. And I really think that this is one of those times where saying Zero was something very calculated to be just shitty. It was just kind of nice to see Will Brooks get on.
He was definitely trying to mess with his psyche, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I really hope that Will Brooks can string a couple of, you know, wins together. Eddie Alvarez can be the longest reigning UFC lightweight champion, and I would love to see them fight, because the idea of them fighting when they were in Bellator, I was so stoked on that fight when they talked to each other on the MMA Hour. This was, 2 years ago. It was awesome, and I would love to see that stylistically too. I think that it would just be a really compelling fight. They're both great athletes. They're both very technical. I think that is the fight to make.
Right.
All things go accordingly. Brian, do you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's something that gives Brooks motivation, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Something to keep him going.
Also, do you think that the UFC would work up that angle, given that it's technically a feud from a different organization?
I don't know. It's hard to tell right now with the UFC, because, I mean, with all the things that are going on. There's going to be a lot of changes, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, Bellator has done that with the UFC, like with the Josh Koscheck, Paul Daly, Tito Ortiz, Stephen Bonner, Kimbo, and Ken. Like,
I mean, I wouldn't put it past. I wouldn't put it past them. You know what I mean? Anything to sell a story.
And when I say Kimbo and Ken, I realize they were never going to fight in the UFC. My point is just them borrowing other people's feuds and having no shame about it. I don't want you to think that I didn't know what I was talking about, because I am. You know, I'm there, man. There's here and I'm here when it comes to MMA trivia. So let's move on to Do-Ho Choi, the Korean Superboy, which feels like you would say that sarcastically, but then he's really good.
Yeah, you know, I haven't seen any of his fights. I was listening to Brett talk about him at the UFC 200, but apparently he's spectacular.
Yeah, he knocked out. I think he's knocked out 3 UFC opponents in a row, which is pretty astounding. And I've enjoyed watching him fight. He looks like a baby. Like, my wife teaches 4th grade. I think that some of her students look older than this guy. I feel like this guy would have to learn how to shave from one of her 4th grade students.
Where is she teaching 4th grade at? Holy shit.
You know, we live in the hood. You know what county? Well, no, we're still in LA County, aren't we? Well, whatever. There's bad parts of LA County, I'm sure. And then the last fight I want to talk about on this crazy bullshit card, Gray Maynard wins against that Francisco Bruno guy. Who thought that was going to work? Who thought that him going down to 145 was a smart choice?
Gray Maynard's always been a big dude. Like, I don't understand why he's doing this.
That's a bad choice. I mean, like, he looked just awful.
He looked like.
Let me ask you a question. You ever hold up a knuckle like this, then drape your nutsack across it and pull it real tight? That's what Gray Maynard's cheekbone looked like. It just looked like this, like, droopy testicle skin, because he was so dehydrated and drawn out and gone.
Have you ever seen The Machinist?
Oh yeah, with Christian Bale. Christian Bale looks like he beat the fuck out of Gray Maynard at 145. Jesus Christ! I mean, I really truly thought that back in the day he would have gone up to 170.
Right.
I've always said that Gray Maynard would be a hell of a guy to do a 165 division. You know, guys like Nate Diaz. Now, if you do a 165 and you change 170 to 175, it just makes sense. There's so many guys who are like right there. And I think that Gray Maynard had obviously just kind of plateaued at lightweight and needed to reinvent his career. But he's not going to fight fucking Robbie Lawler. And obviously he should be fighting guys like Nate Diaz for obvious reasons. But you see my point. I
Right.
think that would probably have been the better choice. But hey, he worked. This is one of those situations kind of like Dan Henderson where you're like, you almost wish they would have lost for their own good because it's like, oh, go away now.
Speaking
Like,
of
go do
Dan
seminars.
Bisbing Henderson. Whoa.
Let's go ahead and talk about that now because I'm fine with it. Quite frankly,
That's a cool fight.
what?
I said that's a cool fight. I mean, if you think about it, it's a way. I feel like I think we talked about this briefly. Like Hendo wins, I feel like he retires with the belt. He relinquishes the belt, and he's like, "Deuces, I'm out." You know what I mean?
Yeah, he was Strikeforce and Pride FC middleweight champion before, so that'd be a great honor for him to be able to finish as middleweight champion. Also, if you want to say that like Anderson is choosing the safe fight, yeah, or Anderson, excuse me, Bisbing. If you want to say he's choosing the safe fight, yeah, there's definitely a compelling argument there. But also think about this. Is there anybody who you want to fight more than the guy who made a graphic of hitting you after you were knocked out, admitting that he did that out of unsportsmanlike conduct? Like, if you're on a quest for vengeance, and now you're Michael Bisping, the guy who's been in the fucking UFC for a decade and never even got a title shot. Yeah, you call your shots. He's making the smart play. I don't care what you say about sportsmanship or him being tough or a pussy. He has all of the chips.
Right. No, he does. Absolutely. And it's one of the things, it's a classic redemption thing. Yeah. Like you touched on. It's one of those things that like I said, I don't see either of them being in like a lose. Obviously Bisbing loses the championship, then yeah, that sucks. But at the same time, Henderson gains a championship, and then at the same time you're like, well, I don't feel like Henderson's gonna be fighting for much longer, and I feel like he would probably retire after that. I don't feel like it's like a bold statement to say or like a prediction, right? I mean, you gotta imagine Henderson's always kind of, not really always, but I should say as of late, been knocking on that retirement door. And
yeah, I think 2 6 and 8, if I'm not mistaken.
So, right. So I mean, could you imagine if he just like takes off his gloves, lays them on the mat with the belt? That would be freaking amazing.
And like, what better motivation also for Dan? He's got a built-in storyline, and think about middleweight at the climate that it's currently at. Who fucking cares who fights who? Go do me a favor. I want you to do me a solid favor. Brian, your brother's in the room, right?
No, he's playing Fallout in the living room.
Okay. Well, when you go in there and ask him if he knows who Yoel Romero is, and I guarantee he doesn't even unpause Fallout and says, fucking leave me alone. I have some bottle caps to collect because I don't know who that fucking is. I don't care who that fucking is. I'd rather play with trash in a post-apocalyptic video game than answer your stupid question. That's how little Yoel Romero matters to everyone outside of the MMA bubble. So when you want to talk about the MMA, like the middleweight title contendership, those are two people who have name brand recognition to everyone. And so why the fuck wouldn't you capitalize on that? Because let me ask you this. Chris Weidman, amazing fighter, great fighter, terrific ambassador for the sport, really helped MMA get legalized in New York. All this stuff, family man, very marketable. And he can't do shit in terms of pay-per-view buys. But I guarantee you that whatever card they decide to put Bisbing Hendo on is going to do very well comparably. And I put dimes to donuts or whatever the phrase you want to say. I think that he not only beats Luke Rockhold's pay-per-view numbers, but Chris Weidman's pay-per-view numbers. You put those two guys. I mean, everybody was saying that's the 1 and 2 in the middleweight sphere, and I guarantee their pay-per-view can't hold a candle to Bisbing Hendo.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And it's one of those things where, like, if you look at the UFC's point of view, you're just like, why not? It's a no-brainer. They're gonna market the shit out of Hendo Bisbing rematch. You know what I mean? They're gonna show that H-bomb over and over and over again, and that Superman freaking shot from standing to Bisbing's chin, like while he's laying on the ground. They're gonna show that over and over again to the point where people are just gonna be like in like a fever as far as like ravenous, like oh my god, I can't wait to watch this again. You know what I mean? I
wholeheartedly agree, and I think that without going too far into beating a dead horse, I think that honestly, I'm not just ruined by that fight. I think Jacare made a comment. honor Dan Henderson by putting him in the Hall of Fame, not stealing my title shot. And it's like, well, Jacare, technically you lost to Yoel Romero, even though I thought you won. And let's face it, your name, people don't even know his real name isn't Jacare. People think that's his name. His name is Ronaldo. So, I mean, that shows you where your fanship lies and how relevant it is. Because the fact is, especially, you don't sell for $4.2 billion fucking dollars because you don't know what you're doing in terms of finances. Nobody gives a shit about you. I mean, I don't get it. So, whatever. Point being, I think that fight is not the travesty everybody's making it out to be. And I'll admit, I am a Bisping fan, so I am somewhat biased, but I don't think I'm that biased to where people ought to be like, in upheaval about it.
Are we on 200 now?
Unfortunately. You want to start this bad boy off? You want me to start this bad boy off?
Well, I mean, I feel like regardless of who starts it, we should probably start from the bottom up. What do you think?
Yeah, like when you check out a dude.
Yeah.
How long that dick hangs, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so you're looking at
Takanori Gomi, Jim Miller.
At least as of no. Yeah, okay. Let's do the Miller one. Yeah, I was gonna go with the Diego one just because offhand that's what comes to mind. But go for it.
Miller Gomi. Miller won. Happy to see Miller win. I don't have anything against Takanori Gomi, but I mean Miller's had a tough go round for a while now, and it was nice to see him kind of come out ahead. Good fight overall. I think that he's got, he has potential at lightweight. Another guy who might be able to do well at 165. But that's all I know. Brian, do you have any thoughts on it?
No, actually, I didn't even see the fight. I was probably too busy getting Lotto Tech chips and salsa.
Oh, yeah. That's a sponsor of the Overtime MMA podcast. Moving on to Gegard Mousasi versus Thiago Santos.
Oh, there we go.
Santos is the first guy I got to see with the yellow shorts, and I was like, oh, yeah, dog, that's interesting. And then he got knocked the fuck out by Gegard, so that was pretty rad.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we always talk about with Gegard. It's like you have the potential to be so good, right? And then you just have catastrophic losses.
Yeah, when he's on, he's really on.
It's
and like him fighting. I'm so glad he fought this instead of fighting Cormier because I don't think he would have done well against Cormier.
Oh no, absolutely not. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's like the 2 steps forward, like 5 steps backwards for Mousasi.
Yeah, I mean he's a guy. If you're talking in a meritocracy, Gegard is much better than he has been treated. But the fact is that nobody knows who the fuck he is, and that's the exact point. He's a middleweight now. And why the fuck wouldn't we talk about him? He's in the top 15. Why wouldn't we talk about him versus Bisping? Oh, yeah, it's because people can't even fucking pronounce his name right.
Right.
Moving on. Diego Sanchez versus Joe Lozon. That was awesome. Yeah,
that was really cool. Another performance of the night.
Correct. And, I think that was the first time that Diego Sanchez has been stopped due to strikes. I think that he's had doctor stoppages in the past, and I think that he's had submissions losses in the past. But as far as being finished,
I don't think he's ever been knocked out, has he?
Not to my knowledge.
Standing knockout, right?
And I think the standing knockout was very appropriate there. I think we saw multiple standing knockouts this weekend, and we're very happy about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's one of those things that's, especially with Diego Sanchez. You got to wonder how things are going up there. You know what I mean? Like, cause it's how many 5-round or not 5, well, just goes to the decision, completely bloody mess, gets hit multiple times in the head, and just the way the guy acts, and it almost seems like it's blatantly there. But at the same time, you're like, okay, well, maybe that's just him. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah, you wonder if he hams it up a little bit, but you got to keep in mind this is the first winner of the Ultimate Fighter.
Right.
That's how long he's been fighting. He's the first, and up until recently, it was Koscheck and him, and now Koscheck might be fighting in Bellator, but he keeps pulling out a fight, so who knows?
Right.
But yeah, I don't necessarily think he needs to hang it up, but maybe take some gimme fights.
Right. And then what do you think about Lozon? I mean, what's next for him? I feel like he's at the point in his career where I don't see him being a title contender, but at the same time, he makes good money doing this. So,
hell yeah. I mean, he's not what you would call a gatekeeper with that negative attitude. He's what you'd call a gatekeeper with like, yeah, this is the litmus test. If you can beat a guy like Joe Lozon, you're fucking solid.
Right, exactly. And that's pretty much spot on. I feel like there's like two types of gatekeepers, and he is definitely on the positive side of that. You know what I mean? He's one. I feel like he will gladly take the role of a gatekeeper, as in he is on a UFC main event. You know, not main event, but main fight card or close to it. You know, and he's making six figures basically, and doesn't seem like he's getting too relatively beat up in the process.
Yeah, he's not all that long in the tooth. And I think that you look at him, you kind of look at the way like Mike Pyle 2 years ago. Like Mike Pyle pre-Matt Brown is the way I look at Joe Lozon.
Right, exactly.
So with that, we can move on to, drumroll, Sage Northcutt beating Enrique Marin, I guess.
No, I do not agree with that at all.
Apparently, he had 106 strikes to Marin's 26 strikes, but he was also taken down 4 times, and there were 2 really, really close sub-attempts on him. But the way I see it is that Sage is a baby, so his joints haven't finished growing, so he's just kind of squishy, and that's the way he was able to get out of that, because I have no fucking idea.
Dude, that arm, oh my God, it almost looked like there's some major ligament damage right there, but apparently not.
Yeah, what can you say? I don't like Sage. It's nothing against him. I just don't like I'm not buying what he's selling. And to your point, you were telling me off air. So he made $100,000 in his winning effort, and then TJ made $75,000, including his win bonus.
Including win bonus, absolutely.
Are you fucking kidding me? A former UFC champion made less than a fucking extra from Dana White looking for a fight. How do you not just want to spit when you hear that? Like, I'm frothing at the mouth just sitting here thinking about how terrible that is. How embarrassing is that?
That's the only thing that comes to mind is embarrassment. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how TJ Dillashaw isn't just freaking the fuck out right now.
Well, even if he is freaking the fuck out, what does it matter? Because you know what? His manager can't go back and go, hey, you guys should pay us some extra for the UFC 200 because that kid. No, that's not the way it works. So he would have to bargain for his next fight? Okay, but he also really wants a title shot, right? So he's going to be kind of grateful for it. You think he's going to be pushing like that? Or do you think he's going to just take what they give him to get his title shot? It's going to be a catch-22 kind of situation. I just don't think they're going to treat him well because they have all the power. I mean, that's what the situation when you're in the UFC and, meritocracy, blah, blah. I mean, fuck. Sage Northcutt got a Reebok deal off of a loss.
Yeah, that happened earlier this week, I think, or last week. Yeah, it's one of those things where you kind of boggles your mind. I forget who it was, but I think it was one of the UFC fighters who actually had kind of tweeted something about that. Like, yeah, so you're giving this guy a Reebok deal. I don't know.
I don't get it. I don't get what's so unique about him. He's not that. I mean, he's fair, but he's not like a world beater. He's not thrilling. He's not super awesome. You know who is pretty super awesome is TJ Dillashaw. I mean, sure, we rooted against him when it came to Dominic Cruz, but when it comes to TJ versus pretty much anybody else at bantamweight, I'm going to root for TJ. And he beat Rafael Assunção. I thought it was very close, but I did have him winning. Did you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. He just showed the dominance and the standing, and the stand up. You know what I mean? It seemed like he just had his number in every exchange.
Would you have paid him $75,000 in that effort? All things being equal, let's say you had Dana White's pocketbook. What would you have paid him for that fight?
I would have given him 120.
I like that figure. That's a good figure. But one thing that Brian Stan pointed out in the UFC, the MMA Hour, which is very interesting, he was talking about how the VIMG group or whatever had their credit score audited, and because they always carry a large amount of debt. And he was saying how it's very not likely that, or I guess not very, it'd be very unlikely that any of the fighters are going to get a huge pay increase because they can't afford to do it, especially after investing $4 billion So I think that that's actually a pretty fair point, and that good luck with that. You know, it's just kind of awful to think about, but I don't think anybody else is going to be paid any better anytime soon. Next, Johnny Hendricks, El Gordito versus Kelvin Gastelum, the everyone pronounces my fucking name wrong, Ito. How'd you score this fight?
Oh, Gastelum fucking wrecked him the whole time. I feel like Gastelum clearly won that fight.
Now, yes, Sal D'Amato gave it 2 rounds to 1, and I'm trying to think of what round Johnny Hendricks would have won. That's not even close.
Yeah, I don't see him winning any round. That's strange.
Yeah, so let's talk about it. Johnny Hendricks, should he ever be allowed to fight at welterweight again?
Nope.
Simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, the guy, I don't know what his deal is. It's like, it almost seems like he doesn't care about professionalism. You know what I mean? It's like the guy that's constantly late at work.
It's a very apt description. And like, I love that he said, like, oh yeah, I'm not really feeling fighting in Vegas anymore. You know what? You should be so fucking lucky to still be employed by the UFC. You've missed weight so many times. You blew an entire fight card. Like, I don't know. And then when we announced this fight, it was so funny. Everybody was like, oh yeah, Kelvin Gastelum missed weight, Johnny missed weight, kind of the redemption song. You know, loser has to buy dinner at Sizzler. And there's fucking Johnny Hendricks, 1 for 5 in takedowns, and it's just,
right.
I don't know. I've never been a huge Johnny Hendricks fan. I mean, I will admit there were times he was thrilling to watch his fight with Martin Kampmann where he skids him across the octagon and stuff like that. But when he fought Robbie Lawler for the title, actually, I didn't like when he fought George. Everybody was like, oh, it's a robbery. Didn't think that was a robbery. George won under the current MMA rules handily. It is a fact. You move on. He gets another shot against Robbie Lawler after George vacates. So he's in the exact same situation as Daniel Cormier, right? Where the true champion is done. He ends up winning the belt from Robbie in a fight I thought Robbie clearly won. Never defends that belt. Loses. Doesn't make weight in his next fight, gets knocked out, then he loses this fight. I mean, this is not a championship level guy, and honestly, I'm wondering if he's even at the level to be in the UFC anymore. I think that he should be calling up Scott Coker and be like, hey, do you guys have a middleweight division? I don't know, but I think I'd be good at it. Right.
Yeah, and it's funny that I couldn't help but think like he had said something. What did he say? Hendricks said he doesn't like fighting in Vegas.
Yeah, he said that he was like over it.
What's funny about that? What I think about that is he doesn't like fighting in Vegas because there's all those all-you-can-eat buffets, and they really fuck him over.
Yeah, the temptation, right? Shouldn't it be easy to sweat and make weight when you're in a desert?
Yeah, it's true.
But that's just my point. Anybody who comes to mind that you would like to see Kelvin Gastelum fight in his next fight?
I was reading up on that, right? Because I was like, who would Kelvin Gastelum look good against? But I can't find anybody that comes to mind. Like they're saying Damian Maia and Carlos Condit. But I feel like either the winner of those. But I feel like either of those guys would fucking destroy Gastelum.
Well, Gastelum's rated number 6 right now. How about he fights the loser of Tyron Woodley and Robbie Lawler? Ideally, that would be if it's Tyron Woodley, because Tyron is only one guy ahead of him. He's 4 versus 6. Him getting a rematch with Tyron, I think that's a solid situation. It could show maturity and depth. He makes the weight.
I feel like Robbie Lawler just fucking wiped the floor with him.
With Tyron or with Woodley?
With Gastelum.
Yeah, I think that's not a stylistic matchup that he wants to. I mean, that's the thing. When you have the grapplers who are, honestly, I think that George St. Pierre would get his head knocked off with Robbie. What's great about Robbie Lawler is when it comes to takedowns, he grew up with Miletich fighting systems, Pat Miletich, Matt Hughes, Jens Pulver, grappling. And sure, you think of him as a striker, but he uses his grappling to stop being grappled, and he is able to assert his dominant posture and destroy people.
Right, because I mean, it's like a super technical thing that these guys do. What's it called? He sprawls. It's
You know that thing they show you your second day of wrestling practice? The
feel like
first day when they show you how to put your singlet on, the second day is sprawling.
Nobody freaking sprawls in the UFC. Nobody. They stand straight freaking up. It's so sad.
It's amazing how many guys you see doing that limp leg, try and reversal and run away. And it's just like you're turning your back to your okay, that's how you want to do it. But it's in terms of takedown defenses, I mean
I feel like a sprawl is like the bread and butter. You know what I mean? Like, and what's great about the sprawl is if there's even a guy that faints, if you sprawl, you land on your stomach, but your hands are out and you bounce back up, right? It's not like you just do like some limp fall on the ground and a guy jumps on top of you. It's a very quick motion, or at least that's how it was with me. You know what I mean? And you look at even with DJ, like DJ, you'll see him do like a sprawl or this or that, but he's so quick and it's just like it literally you're like, wait, did he just sprawl? Because he's up and in your face within 2 seconds.
very good point. DJ's also amazing. So, I mean,
that's also probably an unfair.
Well, also, you look at who he's training with. He's training with Matt Hume, who's an old school guy. Remember, you used to hear sprawl and brawl. That was the thing for a while. Ground and pound, sprawl and brawl. That was the rock, paper, scissors. That's how one beat the other, then one of those loses to jiu-jitsu, right?
Right.
And so, I think, wrestling would beat jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu would beat sprawl and brawl would beat wrestling. Right, that's how it works.
Right, that's how it works.
So anyway,
I don't know. What do you think?
Versus Juliana Pena.
What was that one?
You want to move to Katzengano, Juliana Pena?
Oh yeah, let's go for it.
So that fight was pretty rad. I felt bad for Katzengano, but I mean, she also got worked. So
yeah, it's something that I feel like she did a couple bonehead moves, in that fight that. It seems, I don't know, it almost seems like that happens frequently with Zingano. You know what I mean? Like, she'll just do some, like, bonehead where it's like, what are you doing?
You're like running across the octagon and trying a flying knee she's never done before against Ronda Rousey.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking of.
Not the best of ideas.
Yeah, I don't know. It is what it is. I was rooting for Kat, but no. What can you do?
We've met Juliana. She seemed lovely. She didn't try and attack either of us, which is contrary to all of her other public appearances in the last 10 years, apparently, because all I ever read about is her being arrested for kicking guys in the wieners.
Wow, really? I didn't even hear that one.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't have gone up to her and been like, hi.
You want to kick this wiener? Next was Cain Velasquez versus Travis Brown. I think we both had Velasquez winning this, and he did. Oh yeah, performance of the night did it, and he threw 2 awesome spinning kicks, one of which landed really nicely. It was awesome.
Yeah, man. I feel like Cain Velasquez pulled out like the special move, fucking, like back B, like. Out of nowhere roundhouse kick. Like, what the fuck was that? Like, I think
he was surprised he landed it. That's why he threw it the second time. He's like, wait, what? I could do that? Like, bear in mind, this fucking guy had back surgery this year.
Right.
Does that blow your mind? As an attorney, I deal with people who have injuries all the time. And you see somebody with, like, a back sprain that does 17 months of acupuncture, gets electroshock therapy, has to go to a psychotherapist to talk about his fucking feelings. Meanwhile, Cain Velasquez is having invasive back surgery, gets up, heals up, shows up at UFC 200, fucking dominates, and learns new moves. I remember the last time a guy learned spinning shit like that. I can remember being Vitor Belfort, and he had a lot of assistance from unscrupulous means, but I don't think that Cain does that. I think Cain is like the testimonial of hard work.
Right. And that's one thing that it's almost kind of like the Achilles heel of Cain Velasquez also. You know what I mean? He's a testament of hard work, but at the same time, how hard does he work in his training to himself?
To the point where he's just ground out to nothing and to a fine dust by the time fights come up.
Right.
He and DC both talked about fixing their training methods, and I think it's going to be a really good thing overall with AKA. But I mean, geez, those guys, when they're on, they're so on.
Yeah.
Moving on, Jose Aldo versus Frankie Edgar. For those of you who don't know, Frankie Edgar is my favorite fighter of all time and has been for all time. So to see him lose, I can understand him losing. You know, just like when he fought Jose the first time, I thought that I could see him losing. I mean, I thought this fight was much closer than the last.
Right.
I don't by any stretch of the means think this was a robbery like the Benson-Henderson fights, but I do think that any judge who gives it 4 rounds to 1 is just wrong. Brian, do you agree, disagree? You're obviously less biased than I am.
Right. No, you know what? I don't. I mean, it would definitely be a 3-2 across the board. You know what I mean? And that's just something that I don't know. These judges are so hit and miss. You know what I mean? It just seems like so many times where you're just like, wow, that was exactly how I thought it went. And then other times you're just like, how in the world did they even see that? Were they watching that, or like were they intermittently looking up from their cell phone as they're playing Pokemon Go or something? Or
oh my god, I think that one of the things that I think is really distracting is they don't get to see as good a vantage point as we do. So when Frankie goes for that kick and he gets knocked down by Jose, that's clearly a slip more than it is a knockdown.
right.
But even if we call it a knockdown, yeah, he turns his head in, lowers it in, puts it into Jose's thigh, and is already working away. He never once looks like he's rocked at all. He just loses his posture. But I think that when you're there, you're alive, and you hear that thud of him hit the floor, you're like, oh, it's a knockdown.
Well, and not only that, but they hear the crowd response to it. You know what I mean? They hear oh, or they hear like cheering, and they're like, oh, well, clearly that was something. You know what I mean?
Exactly. What Brian is saying is that we have a bunch of nationalistic pussies who are race traitors, and they're ruining America by not rooting for Americans. Right? That's what you were saying? I'm not speaking for you.
Whoa.
Sorry. I just read that one of the guys who worked for the UFC is joining the Trump campaign, so I just decided to be mildly racist for no reason. Moving on was Daniel Cormier versus Anderson Silva. What do you think of that fight, Brian?
I thought it was pretty scary.
Best reaction ever. How do I phrase this without just crying?
Right. It's one of those things that like you have such high expectations of Jones Cormier, and then everything happened, right? And I mean, we don't need to delve into it because everybody already knows. But yeah, this is one of those things where I feel like there could have been a lot of other guys who would have been a little more competitive, you know what I mean, in the fight. It didn't have to be for a championship. That's fine. At the same time, I feel like there's a lot of other guys that could have benefited of going up against Cormier, especially in the main event or one of the main events of the pay-per-view. You know what I mean? I feel like they threw Anderson Silva in there because Anderson Silva has almost become like a company man. You know what I mean? He's just one of those guys.
Right? Remember when Dana White said specifically, I don't want to talk about Anderson. Now they're buddies. You watch their little Instagram video. I back. He's back.
Right, exactly. So it's just I feel like the way they did, obviously, I mean, they have to come up with somebody in a very quick, short notice. You know what I mean? But I feel like there's fighters who are constantly training, regardless of if they're in a UFC event or not. You know what I mean? And for them to be like, oh well, let's throw Anderson Silva because he's a big name. I don't know. I didn't like it. But
yeah, I think that it was an odd choice. It's clearly a sensational choice. I mean, I struggle to think that if you offered Ryan Bader a shot, he wouldn't have taken it, or various other guys. I mean, Gegard Mousasi was saying he was, and that he would fight Daniel. And what's interesting is Dana White's like, well, that wouldn't be fair to the guy he's fighting. You know who? It's not fucking fair to be named Thiago Santos in the UFC.
And since when did Dana White ever think about fair fights?
Yeah. I didn't like that. I mean, at least have a guy with a fucking training camp. Sure, they're a weight class removed, but Gegard was a light heavyweight champion in Strikeforce. I think that would have been a way more competitive fight. I still think it would have been the same outcome because I think DC's amazing. But in terms of competition in a fight, even on a full training camp, I see that fight going that way. It's not the fact that Anderson had gallbladder surgery. It's not the fact he's coming on short notice. It's just the style of the fight. That's exactly what Daniel Cormier would do every single time. But the fact is they were just using the sensation like, oh, the spider. You know, they're gonna play that Kanye song. It's amazing. I'm amazing.
And it's
amazing. I'm amazing.
It's one of those things too, where like even when you were watching the fight, at least me, I noticed when Daniel took Spider up, and you're like, oh shit, this is like one of his like awesome like over the shoulder slams where he just like drops somebody on their head, and he literally like laid him down on the mat like a sweet baby child. He's like, okay, I'm not gonna hurt this 41-year-old dude. I'm gonna like pick him up. And I mean, not saying, you know, Anderson's that much older than DC, but at the same time,
he also just had surgery. You're like, I don't want you to bust a stitch, so I'm gonna lay you down.
Right, exactly. Like I literally saw DC. Like we both made comment when we were watching it. He was smiling and like laughing as he was like coming towards Anderson Silva because the whole thing was a joke. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's an exhibition bout, and it was just, we're the marks. You know, it's just like pro wrestling. We're all marks. We paid for it. Brian, let me ask you this. You don't have to give names of any of the girls, but if you ever laid a woman down, get beautified harder than Daniel Cormier laid down Anderson Silva with that slam. Because I know I have. And I feel like I might have committed domestic violence now having seen that fight.
That's definitely possible. I mean, I'm not delving, you know, like you said, no names because, you know, I don't want Michelle to kill me. But, yeah, you know, it's one of those things where maybe I need to rethink my strategy.
Yeah. Whoa. Put some fucking bubble wrap around the bed frame because I am not to be trusted anymore. Okay. Awkward. Moving on to Brock Lesnar versus Mark Hunt. What'd you think of that bout?
It's I don't know. I really yeah, my response is, you know, I mean, it's one of those things where like I like Mark Hunt so much, you know what I mean? And like regardless of the outcome, I knew he was gonna get paid, which is awesome. Like I feel like for him to make $700,000 off of a loss to Brock Lesnar is a win. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it went exactly kind of how, like, there was going to be two things that I thought was going to happen, right? I feel like Brock Lesnar was going to rush and Hunt was going to knock his clock off. Or I feel like Lesnar is going to be a little more strategical. And you saw it, you know, in the first round, they were both kind of dancing around, testing each other, seeing, you know, like, you know, gauging each other. And that kind of shows, like, how, I don't know, like, maybe the words, like, I don't know, I can't think of it, like, how serious Brock Lesnar is about, like, fighting, right? Because, I mean, he's not just like, okay, well, I'm going to use my WWE, like, sensationalism to, like, come out here and spear this guy into the side of the cage, you know what I mean? Like, I'm actually going to, like, do a little homework, and I'm going to, like, gauge this guy in the first round, see what happens, and go from there, you know?
Yeah, you think that like a guy like Stefan Struve wishes he could use range as well as Brock Lesnar was doing. He optimized his size. There's many a time when you guys, and you could attest to this, Brian, I was calling out shots that Mark Hunt was going to take before he took them.
Right.
Brock Lesnar was creating distance, just enough distance, using his shoulder to hide his chin. I mean, he did a very fair job, all things considered. I mean, all things being equal, he had a 1-month training camp to fight a top 5. Is Mark Hunt top 5 or top 10? Regardless,
yeah,
it's still somebody who's fought within the last 5 years.
Yeah, it's somebody that has a pedigree. You know what I mean? It's not somebody that's just like some guy that we were like, oh, let's strum up some nobody for Brock Lesnar to beat on. You know what I mean? This is a guy who's been in multiple fighting organizations.
Yeah, he's not Jaideep Singh. You remember that guy who Fedor fought that we only knew his name because it was announced he was going to fight Fedor?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think this was honestly the hardest fight for me to call going into this card. I knew that when it came to Frankie and Jose, I knew I was going to be rooting for Frankie, so that even if he wasn't going to win, you go with your guy. But I was able to make a definitive decision everywhere else in the card, but this is the one where I was like, I don't know. There's so many intangibles that truly this fight was exciting to me because it did have intrigue, but it also truly had merit. Like, people want to ignore Brock Lesnar, and that's fine. I get it. He's the fake guy. He's the movie guy. Whatever you want to say.
But
It's
he's
all
the real
role
deal,
play.
though.
But yeah, he's a 2-time NCAA AA champion, and he's a tremendous athlete. And also, say what you will, I mean, diverticulitis. He had to have, I think it was 11 feet or some crazy amount of his small intestine or large intestine removed. Then he fought Alistair Overeem, who on his worst day is still a great fighter. And
Right.
at the time was on testosterone. Remember, look at the weigh-in picture from that and compare it to now, and then take this into account. In order to get licensed in Nevada, the contingency was he had to have clean drug tests for 6 months after the fight. Well, funny thing happens on the way to the forum. Alistair Overeem tests positive for heightened testosterone after that fight, but they didn't preserve his sample well enough, so they couldn't actually suspend him for it. How fucked up is that? So here you have a guy who, logistically, that fight could be a no contest because within that 6-month period, Alistair Overeem did end up testing positive for high testosterone. So even that loss thing has to have an asterisk next to it.
Right, exactly.
So there are obviously moving factors, but I think that everybody who was talking as much shit on Brock Lesnar, it's like, go back and watch his fights, though. Like, he fights Shane Carwin. He gets fucked up, and he has heart and comes back. Like, he clearly fought with pride and honor, and I'm really, really happy to see that. And I really, Brian, maybe you can speak to this too. What did you think of his promo at the end of the fight?
I liked it. I didn't like the beginning of the promo, but then when he finished it, it was good. You know what I mean? Because he's like, "Oh, I'm the white boy," blah blah blah. But then what did he say at the very end? He said, "Oh, of nations, of It wasn't specifically white, you know what I mean? Like,
it said all nationalities we need to get
all that, exactly.
And it felt like he was making a tongue-in-cheek remark at his own expense, because I feel like he knew that him saying I'm a white boy and I'm jacked earlier in the week was not well received, and people kind of looked at it like it was, taboo. And I mean, obviously he used nationality instead of ethnicity, blah blah. But I think that truly he had a good intention.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I think it's huge. Is like, I can still remember him talking about. I remember it clear as day when he's talking about, I'm going to have a Coors Light because Bud Light won't pay me nothing. And then he talks about he's going to go hump on his wife after he beat, I think it was Frank Mir, this in their rematch. I'm like, this guy is like the biggest heel, and people are going to eat it up, obviously. But then you compare it to this time, and he
was very sincere.
Yeah, it was just very. I mean, I might have been giving him more credit than he should have but I think that even no matter which way you slice it, he still said something that he wasn't prompted to say. It wasn't like Joe Rogan had been like, "Hey, do you have anything you want to say to all ethnicities in the United States?"
Right, exactly.
So good for him. I'm happy to see him come back. I'm happy to see him win, put on a good performance. Now let's talk about the main event.
Hold on.
What?
Before we go into that, I mean, who do you want to see Brock Lesnar go up next? Because, I mean, I feel like it's a big thing to talk about. JDS, maybe?
Oh, no, Brock Lesnar conquers the world. I want him to fight. I want him to come in, and then the whole pay-per-view is just him fighting different heavyweights. We start off at number 15. We work our way up to number 1. And then, boom, the next pay-per-view is the heavyweight title championship fight.
Yeah, I mean, well, think about it, though. If you can't give Brock Lesnar somebody like Roy Nelson, right? Because that is a absolute worst gamble ever, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
the epitome of fitness and masculinity versus the guy who looks like he probably shits the bed multiple times a year.
But I mean, think about it.
He and his wife have that somber morning where they look at each other and they're like, again, and without saying a word to each other, just fold up the sheets, take them outside, and burn them. And they drive in absolute silence to Bed Bath & Beyond, pick out new sheets, drive home, put them on the bed, and then just act like it never happened. So that has to happen at least once a year in the Nelson household.
No, but I mean, think about it, though. It's like you got to give him somebody else that's a big draw, somebody that has a name. but you got to have somebody that's going to be competitive with him. You know what I mean? You can't give him somebody like Cain Velasquez, right? Because I feel like Cain Velasquez would mop the floor.
Yeah, he said that he wanted that fight. Not yet. Give him
right.
a fight.
It's very lofty for him to say something like that. But at the same time, you know, he's coming off a win, so it's awesome. But I mean, Kane's like work ethic is like stand out. He would just outpace the shit out of Brock Lesnar.
How about this? How about Travis Brown?
See, I don't know if they would give it to him off of a loss though.
Well, he was ranked. I mean, he's still a ranked fighter. Brock is unranked at this time, so if he wants to break into the rankings, he has to beat a ranked. I mean, he did just beat Mark Hunt, though, didn't he? Well, shit.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah, I almost wish they'd give him like a freak show fight, like
so how about
Herschel Walker or something like that.
Who do you see Cain Velasquez fighting next? Do you see him fighting Verdum rematch
for a #1 contendership?
Yeah,
I think that'd be a good fight. I really do.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, he's ranked #2. Verdum is ranked #1, and Stipe is ranked as the champion. So Alistair's #4 going up to fight the champion. So I think that you put 2 and 1 against each other, that guy gets the title rematch, and then hopefully, you know, Cain with the modernized training methods is actually able to show up. I don't mean that disparagingly. I like Cain Velasquez. I just like to be able to see him fight rather than on Metro PCS commercials.
Ooh, how about this? Lesnar and winner of Barnett Arlovsky.
That would be a hell of a fight. Either of those guys would be great.
Right? That would be pretty sweet.
Honestly, though, I think that Josh Barnett, I mean, I have such a reverence for Josh that I honestly wonder, like, if that's too hard a challenge. Because I like Andre as well, but either of those guys would be fun because they're older names, they're more relevant names. They're still older names, but still relevant, and then also globally relevant to even the casual fan. I think that would be a really winner or loser. I think you can make a really good argument for him to fight them. And I would just love to see the way they could do a promo for Josh Barnett, the War Master, versus the Beast, hailing from Suplex City, Brock Lesnar.
Could you imagine? That'd be amazing.
If they did it right, fuck yeah, dude. Remember how they advertised for Brock Lesnar versus Alistair Overeem when they did the size and they did the weight and everything?
Right.
Same thing. Just copy and paste that, put Josh Barnett in it, I'm sold.
All right, you want to go on to main event?
Yeah, Miesha Tate lost her belt to Amanda Nunes, and now nobody fucking cares about the women's bantamweight division anymore.
Did you see Miesha Tate's face after the fight? Jesus.
Yeah, when she's holding her nose together. But, like, what the fuck?
I swear, it's like somebody, like the champions, there's something in their water where they just completely abandon any kind of strategy. Because whatever she had planned, she threw it completely out the window.
Dude, we even said, though, like, when she was on her way to the octagon, she was twitchy and weird. Ryan Caraway tried to, like, squeeze her hand, and she was like, yeah. And then when she did the prep point, she shook like a septuagenarian on fucking 20 Red Bull. It was weird. I mean, obviously, it's nerve-wracking. You're defending a title you worked so hard to get in your, you know, adopted hometown. You're suddenly the main event of UFC 200. But I don't know. That was just weird, and it was just she looked bad. And now we have a fighter who's gonna be our women's champion who nobody fucking cares about.
So this is kind of crazy, right? So it's Ronda Rousey for God knows how long. Then it's Holly Holm. 1 title defense. Miesha Tate. 1 title defense. Amanda Nunes. What's next? You know what I mean? Is this going to be like a trend?
I do think so. I don't think there's going to be a dominant women's champion for a while now. I really don't. I think we're the women's division and the talent being as it is. I think you're still kind of in that era of specialists more so than you are with men. You know, Holly Holm is a striking specialist. Miesha Tate's a wrestling specialist. I think that Amanda Nunes, all things considered, is one of the more well-rounded female athletes.
Right.
But I don't see her being able to beat a lot of the bigger names. Like, I think that if she beats Holly Holm, or if she fights Holly Holm wins. She fights Ronda Rousey. I think Ronda's got a really solid chance against her more so than others. That just, you're in the situation where you're like, okay, great. How are you going to sell that fight?
Let's play round robin with the fucking women's bantamweight champion.
Yeah, and it's kind of a situation much like with the flyweight division, where it's like I have a champion, I have to pay them like a champion, but I don't get anything out of them like a champion. I can't milk them for solid pay-per-view buys. I can put them on free TV and kind of do it that way. I think that's the solid choice for her first title defense. I wouldn't put it on pay-per-view even as a co-main.
Do you see what Cyborg said? She's like, well, now that Miesha Tate and Ronda Rousey aren't the champion and they've lost. They have big losses under the belt. Maybe they'll fight me, or one of them will fight me.
Yeah. After seeing the way Miesha Tate got her nose broken that quickly in that fight, I wouldn't want to see her fight in Cyborg. That would be psychotic.
I don't see Ronda Rousey even remotely being in the same fucking like region as Cyborg. You know what I mean?
She should just go to the WWE. I'm not even kidding. She should go to the WWE, get the Brock Lesnar schedule where you do a couple of events, and then you do the pay-per-views. You go home happy.
Crazy, Yeah, I agree.
She's not even. I mean, she can't even fucking act. Let's face it. In the Entourage movie, she couldn't even fucking play herself. So she can't. Like, as far as Hollywood goes, I think that well is going to dry up real quick, especially after the Lifetime movies come out. Then what do you got? You got your athleticism, but you've kind of been exposed, and you have a lot to lose. Well, you could go to a place where it's fucking scripted, and you could be, Bill Goldberg in a sports bra and dominate everybody until it takes 14 fucking people and tasers to beat you.
It's true. It's true.
It's true. It's true. It's damn true, in the words of Kurt Angle. Now let's talk about the UFC being sold. What is this shit? They said they were going to give us details today. I got no details, man. Did you get details?
Nah, all I kept on reading is apparently everything's supposed to be ironed out by 202. But
hot damn. I'm so excited to still be in the dark for the next 2 months. The only thing I got out of this was I resent Dana White more than I thought I did.
Right.
He just straight lies to people. And I get it. There's this thing called pleading the fifth, where you don't make a comment, you can still build intrigue, but you're not lying to people. That's what I don't like about Dana White. And threatening people.
Right. Absolutely. It almost goes back to the Brock Lesnar spill. You know what I mean? Like, threatening people, I can't think of his name.
Ariel Helwani, Esther.
You know what I mean? It's just one of those. That's who he is, and it's sickening. You know what I mean? Like, how can somebody like that be the face of the UFC? But it is what it is, I guess. It's kind of interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see what kind of changes we can see, because they're going to be very subtle. But I feel like to the avid fans like ourselves and others out there, without the Furtado brothers being there, there's going to be changes. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like they made more behind the scenes changes that a lot of people probably didn't, see or, acknowledge, but helped the company in like a really positive way. And I feel like them being on is going to be like, I feel like there's going to be some different things going on.
Given the marketing element of the company, I think that they might be able to brand the sport better, to be honest, because we're still in that bro bullshit era. I mean,
right.
Dana White looking for a fight is not meant for people like you and me, Brian. It's not meant for people like our fans. Our fans, I'm not just pandering here, are too fucking smart, too well-educated to be sitting there watching Dana White hold hands with Matt Serra getting tased. And then trying vegan noodles, which is the craziest. Can you believe it? He tried a vegan noodle. I just saw that in the synopsis and I was like, get fucked. It's not crazy. It's not cool. It's not spectacular. Fucking move on. Like 90% of noodles are vegan anyway, dickwad. Who gives a shit?
Oh, shit.
And like I've been saying for years that the Ultimate Fighter needs to change. We talked about this and you kind of backed me up on it. I've watched that NXT program that WWE does. Bam, I loved it. I thought that I can't speak to the whole product, but this episode that I watched, I was very impressed with the presentation, with the in-ring performances. The crowd was great. It was a hot crowd. It was awesome. I loved it. Why wouldn't you do something like that with the Ultimate Fighter? Why do they have to be in a bubble? Why are you still trying to make it work that they live in a fucking mansion? Nobody cares because it's the same contrived plot over and over again.
I know why. I know. I got this. I get this. I understand why this happens because the UFC, like we talked about before, they feel like they have the demographic of like the bros, right? Okay, the kind of people that watch something like MTV Real World or something like that, right?
Exactly.
It's like, well, let's completely copy the script of like Real World Road Rules Challenge, but we'll do it like Ultimate Fighter style. Like, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, it drives me crazy. I think that why not, like with the Ultimate Fighter Live, could have been so cool, but doesn't really work. Also, huge thing that's wrong with it is that you have a bunch of people living in a house for 16 weeks alone and ostracized from the world. Who gives a shit if they can talk to their fucking friends and family? Let them be social on social media. Let them promote the thing that they're on. Let's build interest. Let's move this along. Let's do this. Have them bring their camps, right? Imagine if the show was an 8-man tournament and you just did it week by week. That could be so cool, so much different, so much better. But with these slight changes, but they're not going to do it. Why? Because they've been pandering to the same audience that's 10 years ago. They're like the show, really, since they stopped doing the stupid challenges in second season, I think it was, it's the same exact show.
So one thing that like reeling back in to the original thing we were talking about, with how much money has been thrown around for the acquisition of the UFC, do you think there's going to be any major changes as far as like, is there going to be new arenas built, or is there going to be, is there going to be new clothing? Is Reebok going to get bought out for the clothing line? I mean, I feel like somebody that's got that much control over the UFC, they can be like, no, fuck this Reebok shit. It's not working. We're going to do something else.
Well, I think they're going to be bound by all the contracts that the UFC had. So they're going to be bound by Fox for the time being. They're going to be bound by Reebok for the time being because they're just going to step into their shoes as a corporate entity. Because in terms of legality, corporation acts as a person. So they're going to be bound by the same contracts. But as far as the direction they go in, they can certainly change it. And Fight Pass, think about that as a vessel. Why? I don't get why they even need Dana White still. I get that people are resistant to change, but he's not likable. Like, who likes Dana White? I don't know where these people are, because everybody who I talk to, if I actually can find someone on the street who likes MMA or even knows what the fuck MMA is, they never like Dana White. They're always like, oh, that guy.
I feel like it's like people who haven't followed the sport for a long enough time still like not still like Dana White, but like Dana White. You know what I mean? They're like, oh yeah, it's this guy. He sounds kind of pompous, but I mean, he's kind of clever and funny, so he's not bad. But like, it's like throughout the years, like we consistently see how bad Dana White is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's like a guy who's trying to be Vince McMahon and like ECW Paul Heyman at the same time, where it's like he doesn't give a shit and he's the boss and you listen to him, but he's also cool and we like him. And it's like, no, you don't have that cult following. People aren't obsessed with you. So that's pretty much all I have to say about the sale, because we still don't really know enough about it, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think it's going to be status quo for a long time. I highly doubt they're going to come in and overhaul. Like, think about even when the UFC bought WEC or bought Strikeforce, it was still business as usual for a couple months, and then they did their changes. So at least as of now, I think we're going to be treading water and then eventually changing. And I don't even think it's going to be drastic change. I think it's going to be slow, incremental, paced change. You don't make a $4 billion investment without pacing yourself and knowing what you're getting into.
Agreed.
All right. You done? Are you as tired as I am? I have lost all of my endurance for this podcasting shit in the time that we were off.
Well, but I mean, I feel like we pretty much covered all that we needed to cover.
Fuck yeah. So go ahead and watch the Ultimate Fighter this week on Wednesday. You can tell us what you thought about it, because I'm not doing a preview on that. Nobody gives a shit about that fight card.
Nope.
I hope Kyle Noak wins. I hope Michael McDonald wins. And that's all I can remember. I'm tired.
We're both tired.
All right. So aside from being tired, I'm also Jake. Aside from being tired, he's also Brian. And together, with our powers combined, we are the Overtime MMA Podcast. And we hope you enjoyed the Super Show. Please be sure to like, subscribe, share, buy merchandise of ours. It doesn't exist. You have to get it pirated. I'm sorry. But do stuff to support us. We'll support you. We will be your push-up bra, and you will be the wind beneath our wings. Have a great day. What was my sign-off before we stopped doing this show for so long? I had one. It was clever. Oh, until then, we're overworked, underpaid, and out of time.